have been we looked at last week with Hebrews 11 and 12 and going into that idea of the discipline of the Lord and what it's needed, how it's talked about in terms of training in order to run the race and finish the race through those kind of trials and through those kind of struggles and sufferings and hardships. That actually is the means by which we are disciplined to be able to finish the race. That's what gives us that strength of faith. So Hebrews 12 talked about the discipline of the Lord, how He is actually treating us as His legitimate children when we go through His discipline. It's actually a bigger concern and sign if you're going through life without His discipline. That's actually a bigger concern. But He is allowing these trials. He's allowing these hardships in our lives because He wants us to be strengthened in our walk and our faith, but also because He actually wants us to be counted among the great heroes of the faith. Chapter 11, and we read through that, and we see all those great things, and it's like we read it, man, I've never seen Him do things like that in my life, or there's no way I can measure up to those people that He talks about in there. But He actually wants that list in Hebrews 11 to get longer. And He wants the people of God, He wants our names to be added more and more to that list and to that name of the great people of faith. So the people that we read about and look up to from chapter 11, we can have that same kind of life of faith that they did. But remember, the life of faith is also one that includes a lot of struggle and hardship. So remember, chapter 12 is not hardship. It's not suffering because of doing wrong. It's not hardship or discipline because of sin, but because they're actually doing what is right. They are enduring the hardship and discipline because they are holding on to their faith in Yeshua and they're being persecuted for it. And nobody enjoys it. Nobody likes it. Nobody wants to go through these kind of things and what it takes to get to a state of endurance and discipline. I mean, not very many people really enjoy, in the military, enjoy boot camp all that much, from what I hear. Nobody who played sports like football enjoyed, training camp and all the things before the actual season started, because that's when you have to tear down your body from all that laziness of summer, right? You know what I'm talking about. And when you're that happens a lot. So you don't enjoy what it takes to get to the point of being able to run the marathon or run the race. But if you're going to run it, you have to go through it in order to be able to. And nobody really enjoys that. That's what he talks about. Now, all of this discipline seems painful at the moment and not joyful, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And so we as the people of God need to understand that we are in training, and He uses hardship and persecution in that role. We are being trained to yield the fruit of peace and righteousness. And training, can wear us out, get us tired, even injure us to where we forget which way we're supposed to run. That's what he talks about in verse 12. He says, therefore, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, those who are struggling and having a hard time with their persecution. He says, make straight paths for your feet so that what is lame will not be pulled out of joint, but rather be healed. Because sometimes you can get injured in the training, right? There are some people that get injured in boot camp and they never make it past that. But he is wanting us to be strengthened, and when we are weak, when we are injured, part of our training means staying on the straight and narrow path, being able to discern between the clean and the unclean, the right from the wrong. That's the straight path for our feet. We've got to keep focused, as you were talking about, Mackenzie, keep focused on where we're going and not be distracted or not hold on to all the things that can get our attention. Staying with the Messiah is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. And so the injuries that may have been inflicted, the hardships that may have been inflicted, the wounds that these believers may have experienced need the healing that comes from staying together on this path. The community of faith is going to need the strength and the healing for the days that are ahead. Because very soon, the world is going to be shaken. The prophecies and the promises that were foretold in the past, those are soon going to be taking place. And the question is whether the readers of Hebrews are going to be afraid of those events or anticipating those events. Are they going to feel like they're left out of them or included in them? When things begin to happen in the fulfillment of God's promises, are we going to pull back in fear, or are we going to stand by faith? Those are some of the things that they were struggling with, because they certainly expected all of those things to be happening in their day. But we need to be anticipating this unshakable kingdom that is coming. And everything that it takes to get there is not always going to be pleasant. The readers of Hebrews, these Jewish believers in Messiah, they believed, like Paul and the others, that Yeshua's return was going to happen in their lifetime. His return was imminent, and their day was in turmoil. There was this foreign occupation of Rome that was increasingly heavy-handed. The priesthood that was there was often corrupt and had missed the arrival and the coming of Messiah the first time. And so the people were living under a corrupt government, a corrupt religious system. There were pockets of revolt and resistance or gathering in strength. When we look around in our day, we see some things lining up, don't we? We talk about being in the days of fulfillment. We're seeing more and more of the things that are giving us some indication that we are in the season of His coming. And we can be afraid about that, or we can see these things as training to get us ready for those events leading up to it. We cannot see or touch these moments yet ourselves. It's not something that's happened yet. And yet we can see it's getting closer. It's like the date has been circled on the calendar, and we know it's coming, but we don't know exactly when that date is. So that's what's causing us, so many believers and so many people who look to the name of Yeshua are getting nervous about it, and there's this uncertainty. And for the readers that are here in this day, reading of the book of Hebrews, it's especially true for them if they've been told that they are cut off from what God has been doing all along. Because you're going in this direction, then you're no longer a part of what He's been doing. That's what the readers of Hebrews have been hearing from all the temple authorities. That's what they've been told, that you're no longer a part of us. You're cut off. You're no longer welcome in the temple. You're no longer part of the ceremony. Well, how can we be a part of the future that's coming if we're not a part of the past of what He has done? And that's really a serious question that most of Christianity needs to ask ourselves in our day. Because in a lot of ways, we've cut ourselves off from a lot of the past, intentionally. But the author of Hebrews is addressing these kind of concerns, and he's contrasting, Israel in the past for where they are supposed to be in their day. And so the first thing that the author describes in verse 18, it's not what's happening to them, but what has happened. He says, you have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and to a blazing fire, and to darkness, and gloom, and storm. You've not come. In other words, the situation that I'm about to describe is not your situation. You were not there those days. You've not come to this situation, to this moment, by being there at that mountain. But you're still included. Even though you weren't there at the foot of Mount Sinai, that doesn't mean it's irrelevant to you and who you are. You were included. We've read this passage before. He says, not with you alone, it's Deuteronomy 29, not with you alone am I cutting this covenant and this oath, but with whomever is standing here with us today before Adonai our God, and with whomever is not here with us today. This is talking about the future generations of the people of God, the future generations of the people of faith who are believing and trusting in Him and all of His promises and all the things that He is going to be doing. If we are believing in those things, then it's as if we are there at the foot of the mountain. And so those things are relevant to us. And so what the author is describing is the reaction. He describes the reaction of the people of God to God's presence at Mount Sinai. And we read about it in Exodus 19, when they are camped, so they're at the base of the mountain. It says, "Be ready for the third day. For on the third day Adonai will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people, and you are to set boundaries for the people all around, saying, be very careful not to go up onto the mountain or touch the border of it. For whoever touches the mountain will surely be put to death." Should be taken seriously. "Not a hand is to touch it, but he will surely be stoned or shot through. Whether it is an animal or a man, it will not live. And when the shofar sounds, they may come up to the mountain." Then verse 16 says, "In the morning of the third day, there was thundering and lightning, a thick cloud on the mountain, and the blast of an exceedingly loud shofar. And all the people in the camp trembled. And then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the lowest part of the mountain." Verse 18, "Now the entire mountain of Mount Sinai was in smoke, because Adonai had descended upon it in fire. The smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly." I mean, that would be quite a sight. Amen? I would be extremely intimidated there, as we should be. After all that God had done for them to bring the Israelites out to this point, the hard part was they still didn't really know Him or still didn't really trust Him. Their world was being shaken. And they were responding in many ways in that level of fear, which is understandable. He says, all the people witnessed the thundering and the lightning and the sound of the shofar and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they trembled and stood far off. And so they said to Moses, "You speak to us and we'll listen, but do not let God speak to us, for we will die." And again, I can't blame them for reacting that way. The move of God in power in this way would shake everybody to their core. And these are the same people who had already been through great and traumatic plagues directed at the Egyptians. They got to experience some of those themselves. But now they're going to have it. This is their concern. He's up there on the mountain with all this thundering and lightning and all this loud shofar and smoking and shaking. And they're like, oh boy, I hope this doesn't get turned on us. God is shaking the world with His presence, and they are keeping their distance. And so the writer of Hebrews summarizes it this way. He says, "You've not come to a mountain that can be touched, to a blazing fire, and to darkness and gloom and storm, and to the blast of a shofar and a voice whose words made those who heard it beg that not another word be spoken to them. For they could not bear what was commanded. And if even an animal touches this mountain, it will be stoned." So terrifying was the sight that Moses said, "I am quaking with fear." So when God moved in the past, when He revealed His glory, this is the kind of reaction He would typically get. Don't you think He would, if He showed up today in this manner, would He get the same kind of reaction? Yes, from most people. Many people would approach, even in the days of the book of Hebrews, they would approach the temple a lot the same way. The sacrifices the same way, with a level of fear and concern, not in confidence. They approach the mountain with fear and trembling. So even in living, centuries later, in living to keep the commandments, they were still concerned about having the approval and the acceptance of God. That sense never went away. And even more so for these Jewish believers who were now denied access to the temple. They were denied participation in the God-ordained services and sacrifices. How should they live? How should they feel? If this is, they know where God is taking everything, and we're being pushed out and left out of all of those things, should they constantly live in fear of His disapproval and judgment because they couldn't do what He says to do? They're being treated as outcasts. And the answer to that question comes in assuring them that they too have come to the mountain. They have not been excluded. They have not been kicked out. That might be happening here on earth, but they are able to approach a greater mountain. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 puts it like this. He says, but you have come. Remember, he said you have not come to a mountain, like you said previously. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels in a joyous gathering. This is what you have done. See, the readers are coming to the mountain in days of fulfillment that are just as significant as when the Israelites came to Mount Sinai. God was moving then, and He is moving in their day, and they're both vital, necessary, and important to be a part of. They are continuing in that legacy of faith, and they need to know that this is the reality of their time. They're coming to Mount Zion. They're coming to the city of the living God. But what if they're no longer allowed? Mount Zion, they think Jerusalem. If they're not allowed because of Yeshua, are they no longer a part of that legacy? Well, that might be a possibility if Yeshua were still dead in the tomb. But what kind of God are they serving? Is it a dead God? It's a living God. He is a living God. He has already shown victory over sin and death. He's already demonstrated that is achieved. And you may not be able to see it at this moment on earth, but in the heavenly Jerusalem, this part, in the heavenly Jerusalem, what's already started? The party's already started. The celebration has already started because that reality is there. It is a joyous gathering, and it is almost upon you. The king is awaiting his coronation. That is the reality. This is what believers in Yeshua need to know and have to come to, that they are arriving at the city even that Abraham saw in his day, because this is what Abraham was looking forward to. We already talked about that back in chapter 11. He was talking about Abraham. He was waiting for the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. That is the truth that they need to hold on to. There is a festive gathering that they are a part of. They will either live to see it occur in their day, or they will join it in death while awaiting their resurrection. And so despite any of the pronouncements by any authority here on earth, despite any refusal to be included, for their names to be included on the Day of Atonement, talking about the Book of Life, or any refusal to count them among the people of Israel, despite any effort to exclude them from the fellowship and cut them off from the other Jewish believers, the author assures these believers in Yeshua that they are still counted among the people, and they are still a part of the celebration of fulfillment. Hebrews 22. You have come to the heavenly Jerusalem, to the myriads of angels, and a joyous gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn. They are still a part of that. When you think about that, the assembly of the firstborn, they've come to all of this. Who is the firstborn? Israel is. Right? Exodus 4. says, "You are to say to Pharaoh, this is what Adonai says, Israel is my son, my firstborn. And so I have said to you, let my son go, that he may serve me." And again, another place is in Jeremiah chapter 31, the very chapter that describes the new covenant, the Torah, being written on our hearts. Even though the kingdom was divided, and one group might think one was a part of it and the other one was not, or something else like that. In Jeremiah 31, he says this, he says, "With weeping and supplications they will come. I will bring them, leading them to walk by streams of water on a straight path." Remember what he said just a minute ago about making straight your feet, path straight for your feet? "Where they will not stumble, for I am Israel's father, and Ephraim is my firstborn." So these are the firstborn is discussed in these days of fulfillment. And when all of Israel returns as the assembly of the firstborn, again, what happens? There's a celebration. When they are gathered and brought in together, and all of the promises start being fulfilled. Verse 10 goes on and says, "For Adonai has ransomed Jacob. He redeemed him from the hand of one stronger than he. They will come and sing on Zion's heights," and coming to the mountain, "radiant over the bounty of Adonai, over the grain, the wine, the oil, and the young of the flock. And their life will be like a watered garden, and they will never languish again." So the readers of Hebrews are being told that they are no longer a part of the firstborn. But the author is reassuring them that you're not going to miss any of this. No matter what they say, you're still a part of this. You are not excluded. You are not cast out or cut off because you believe in Yeshua. Their names have been written on a scroll in heaven, and the high priest doesn't have the authority to say who or who is not written in that scroll. That's where he goes back to in verse 23. So you come to this joyous gathering, you come to the assembly of the firstborn who are written in a scroll in heaven. See, all of those things that they would be denied on the Day of Atonement, because the Day of Atonement is a big issue in the book of Hebrews. He goes through it and says, no, really, you are included in these things. Their names are still there, still written in the book of life. That reality is in heaven, in the royal courtroom before God. The high priest here on earth of the Aaronic line does not have that position in heaven. He does not have the authority as the high priest in heaven. Only the high priest in the order of Melchizedek has that authority. And only he officiates there. So the believers are not excluded from Israel. The believers still have their names written on the scroll in heaven that is directly before God and in his presence in the royal court. He's written on a scroll in heaven, and to God, the judge of all. All of this is read. All of this is in his presence. All of this has his approval. Because whose opinion do you really need to worry about most of all? Do you need to worry about what your neighbors think, or what somebody down the street thinks, or what a governor thinks, or a president thinks, anything like that? We have to worry about their opinion? Really? No. We worry about his, the God and judge of all. So whether or not we are recognized in the eyes of men, these believers in Yeshua are counted among the righteous. And they are just like those that they were reading about in chapter 11 in the Hall of Faith. So they are written in the scroll in heaven to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous ones that have been made perfect. Those are the ones that have already died and entered into that presence. So despite all of the pronouncements, all of the accusations, all of the charges that they may be hearing, they are still included and have not lost those promises that they've all been waiting for. And so how is that possible? How are they coming to Mount Zion? How are they coming to the heavenly Jerusalem? How are they being counted among the righteous on the day of what is essentially the joyous assembly, the wedding feast? It's by their faith in the one that is getting them into such trouble in the first place. By Yeshua. They are coming by and through Yeshua. He actually is the key, the essential element to be included in all of those promises. Because without Him, that's actually what being on the outside is all about. Without Yeshua, you're not included in all those things. But with Him, you are. He says, you have come, and you are included among those who are the righteous ones already made perfect, and to Yeshua, the mediator of this new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks of something better than the blood of Abel. So Yeshua is the mediator of the new covenant. He is the one who establishes that and advocates us for us there in the presence of God. He is the one who represents both parties. The mediator doesn't represent just one side or the other. He represents both. God and humanity, until both are satisfied with the terms and they come to the agreement. When you go look back at Hebrews chapter 9 and 10, it's already established how Yeshua's sacrifice is better than any that the Aaronic priesthood has to offer. But you think about it, what does it mean that it's better than the blood of Abel? This one took a little chewing on a little bit. And there's two ways that I can primarily see this. First, it could be talking about the blood of the sacrifices that Abel was offering. Remember all the way back in Genesis chapter 4, how did God look upon Abel's offering? He looked on them with favor. Right? He approved of what Abel was doing and what he was bringing. So he accepted them. And Yeshua's offering of himself and his blood was better even than that, because it was accepted and it was proved to be accepted by the resurrection. And it covers us. So that's one way. The second way that it could be understood as better than the blood of Abel, was Abel a righteous man? Yeah, chapter 11 established that. And even as a righteous man, he still struggled and suffered. He lived a relatively short life comparatively to the others, even the one who killed him. But he was a righteous man, and he was also the first human physical death recorded. And he was the victim of an unjust killing. Just like somebody else we know. Just like Yeshua. But his blood did not repair any breach with God, nor did it cover Cain's sin. Instead, Abel's blood cried out the guilt of his brother Cain. And so Abel's blood further solidified God's righteous judgment, while Yeshua's blood covered an atonement. So those are the two ways that I think this is talking about, that the blood of the new covenant, the blood of Messiah, is even better than the blood of Abel. So Yeshua is the means and the mechanism that we can even go up the mountain. Only by those who have been washed in the blood of the Lamb, and that we may approach Mount Zion and the heavenly Jerusalem without the fear and trembling that occurred on Mount Sinai and the giving of the Mosaic covenant. Yeshua, being born to a young Jewish girl in a small town, completely helpless, grew up and was able to speak the words of truth. And rather than everybody cowering back in fear, he was one that was inviting even the children to come to him. He became the mediator of the new covenant. And that is that all the Jewish people really have been waiting for. The reason they were being kicked out of the temple was actually their ticket into the days of fulfillment. Without trusting in Yeshua, they didn't have that promise. And so listen to Yeshua's voice and declarations more than any human authority. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 25 puts it like this. It says, see to it that you do not refuse the one who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused the one who was warning them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject the one who warns us from heaven. Remember, they were being tempted to go back, to give up Yeshua in order to gain that access of the temple. But they must not do that. They must not reject the one who warns us from heaven. And there's something in this verse that's important that I think we may miss. The voice that they do not escape, that was warning them on earth, that's the voice of Mount Sinai. The one on earth when they came to with the darkness and the storm and the trumpet blast and there's this voice from heaven, it's the voice of the Master. The voice from Mount Sinai caused that trembling, that fear, that even accountability. And it should be taken seriously. And then there's the voice of the Master from heaven, the one who warns us from heaven. Is likewise to be taken seriously because all judgment has been entrusted to who? All judgment has been entrusted to the Son. His opinion is one that matters. But notice the one voice from Sinai and the one voice from heaven, are they on the same terms? Yes. They are equating. The voice is one voice. And it's one voice that spoke at the mountain, and it's one voice that spoke from heaven. They're not separate voices. So Yeshua is speaking and pronouncing the word of the Father. In fact, he is the Word made flesh. We talked about that. Yeshua's voice shook the earth at Sinai, and it will again. And this time, it won't just be the earth that is shaken. Mount Sinai, the earth shook. But upon his coming and his return, it's not going to be just the earth. Verse 26 says, his voice shook the earth then. But now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. See, this is what's coming. This is what we're still waiting for. We're still waiting for the voice from heaven that shakes the earth. And when that starts to happen, all the rulers and authorities, all the princes and the kings, all the governments and militaries will be shaken. And their authority and their power will be taken from them. That at the name, at the announcement, the pronouncement of Yeshua and the shofar call, letting the world know that the bridegroom has come for his bride, what happens? That at the name of Yeshua, every knee should bow. Where? In heaven and on the earth and under the earth. Right? The heavens and the earth will be shaken. And the dead will break forth. But then every tongue profess that Yeshua, the Messiah, is Lord to the glory of God the Father. See, this is the reality that believers need to hold on to with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Because that is what is coming. And even though it didn't happen during the lifetime of the first century believers like they were expecting it would, every generation should always anticipate and expect it to happen in theirs. And then when we begin seeing things happening and falling into place, we're thinking, man, sure seems like we're getting a lot closer. This is what is coming. And when his voice comes to shake the heavens and the earth, then everything changes. Look at verse 27. Now this phrase, yet once more, shows the removal of those things that are shaken, that is, the created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. See, all the authorities, all the created things, anything that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, what's going to happen to it? They're going to be removed. They're going to be taken out of the way. And they will all be torn down at the word of Yeshua, at His command. And this is intended to bring two things to mind, or at least it brought two things to my mind, which my mind works in strange and mysterious ways, which I know some of y'all find humorous sometimes. But the first is Matthew's Gospel, chapter 24, when he's talking about the coming of the kingdoms. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the land will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And He will send out His angels with a great shofar, and they will gather together His chosen ones from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Right, so this is again talking about that gathering. So also when you see all these things, know that it is near and at the door. Amen, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen. See where they might be getting the idea that it could be happening in their lifetime. Then he says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. You keep that in mind with that sense of Hebrews, where he says in verse 27, shows the removal of those things that are shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. His words cannot be shaken. His pronouncements are not going to be removed. They're not going to disappear. They are going to remain. Heaven and earth, that's all going to change. Those things are being taken out of the way. Yeshua's word will remain and endure when every other word, every other authority, every other kingdom gets brought down. Only His word will remain. And His word, it's greater than the created order because He was a part of speaking it into existence. But it also reminds me of another prophetic scripture about the kingdoms of the earth being shaken by the coming of Yeshua's kingdom. These are all things that these Jewish believers would have in mind. And that comes out of Daniel chapter 2 and Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue. Y'all remember that? We went through Daniel earlier this year. He sees the head of gold, the chest and the arms of silver, the stomach and the thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, the feet of iron and clay. Then this happens. While you were watching, a stone was cut out, but not by hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors that the wind blows away. And not a trace of them could be found. Does that sound familiar? Then the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Verse 44 says, now in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Nor will this kingdom be left to another people. It will crush and bring to an end all of these kingdoms, but it will endure forever. So who is the rock? Yeshua is the rock. He is the stone upon which the kingdom will be built and will crush all other authorities. And if you want to be a part of that, if you want to receive the kingdom, then you don't back out on Him. You stick with Him because everything else that is not of him will be consumed by the judgment of God. He says in verse 28, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. That's what we have in our future. That is what is coming. It's not going to be like any of these other kingdoms that Nebuchadnezzar saw. Can they be shaken? Yes. Can the United States be shaken? Yes. This is what we need to look for. This is the one that we need to trust in. This kingdom that cannot be shaken. Let us show gratitude. Through this we may offer worship in a manner pleasing to God with reverence and awe. For our God is a consuming fire. And he will consume everything that is not pleasing to him. And so if you have Yeshua, then you've got that. You've got that future, that reality. Despite what anybody else says, despite what anybody else tries to exclude you from, this is the reality. And so we need to continue to fix our eyes on Yeshua, the author and perfecter of our faith. And when we see the nations rising up, and when we see the turmoil of the world and things getting crazy and them doing stupid things, when we see the authorities rising up and persecuting those who claim his name, when they want to exclude you or drive you out and say, you can't even go out in public or go to a restaurant or go other places. Let us remember that our names are written on a scroll in heaven, and they can never be blotted out because they are covered by his blood. Let us remember that all the things that may be going on right now that may cause us to be worried or afraid or tremble, we need to hold firmly and hold with anticipation. Hold on to that truth. We need to look to the east and listen for the sound of the shofar, because our final redemption is coming soon. That reality is more real than all the stuff that we see going on, or even the stuff that we watch on the news. Because we are going to be running the race with endurance. That's what the Spirit of God is giving to us. He is training us. He's training us in this day because we need to be running the race in the future. And it's not bad yet, at least not here. Maybe in some other places. But we are in training right now to be able to run the race and finish the race. Amen? So let us fix our eyes on him, because we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And we can rejoice in that, because as we were reading about a minute ago, the party's already started.